Hi friends! Over the last couple of days, we've been thinking about how the church, in a universal sense, is a community on the move, following the way of Jesus. That includes all people of all times and all places who love and serve Jesus. Over the next couple of days, I want to turn our attention specifically to the United Methodist Church. Let's begin with some history. John Wesley was the founder of Methodism. John was a priest in the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, and he never intended to start a new church. What he did start was small groups of people who met together to study the scripture and practice their faith in very methodical ways. And because of those methodical, some might say regimented practices, the term Methodist was used in a derogatory sense to make fun of them. Now, John Wesley was actually a very remarkable person. He preached over 40,000 sermons and traveled over 250,000 miles to share the good news of Jesus. The Church of England considered him to be somewhat of a rebel, and so he was banned from preaching in some of the churches. And so he took his preaching to where the people were, and he would preach in open fields so that anyone who wanted to hear about Jesus could. In addition to working for personal holiness, that is spiritual change, Wesley also worked for social holiness, that is communal societal change. And we'll come back to that theme next week. John's younger brother, Charles Wesley, was also a priest in the Anglican Church, and in many ways was a co-founder of Methodism. We remember Charles primarily for his hymn writing ability. He wrote over 6,500 hymns. We still sing many of them today. One that I know you're familiar with is "Hark the Herald Angels Sing." The Methodists broke away from the Church of England after the Revolutionary War in America, and the new Methodist Church grew with the new nation. We could talk a long time about our history, but let's speed things up a little bit and take a gallop through United Methodist history.
Well, back when our country was very young, John Wesley said, "There's a job to be done." Young Francis Asbury said, "Send me." So they put him on a boat sailed across the sea. Now, he didn't know a Tea Party was brewing and the American Revolution was stewing. And by the time that the war was won, why, a brand new church had just begun. Right here in the U.S. of A. Freeborn Garrison rode for weeks all over the countryside, calling all the preachers to Baltimore for a Christmas conference. Asbury became a bishop, a new denomination was officially formed, and they called it the Methodist Episcopal Church. Well, there were three different groups in those early days, and they were going their own separate ways, started their own publishing houses, you see, to get the word out more effectively. There were Methodists, Episcopals, United Brethren too, and the Evangelical Association who would all get together on down the line.
Guten Tag.
Howdy do. Auf Wiedersehen.
They just didn't know it right at the time. Well, the country was growing from shore to shore, and so were the Methodists, and what's more, they were traveling and preaching to the countryside, and all the ministers went on a circuit ride. Woo, that was tough. With rain and sleet and snow on horseback, you see. And when the weather got real bad, people used to say it was only fit for crows and Methodist preachers. And the spirit was moving in those early days, you know. Camp meetings all over the place, and churches started popping up everywhere. But the country growing like it did, there were problems too that couldn't be hid. Just look at the Indians in the situation. The government sent them to a reservation. Yeah, some Methodists didn't like that at all. They marched right along with them on the Trail of Tears out west. Now the nation wasn't even a century old when somebody yelled, "California gold!"
Come and get it.
Half the country went out west, including some of those Methodists. Of course, there were other folks already out there. You wonder what they thought.
¿Qué revolú es este?
Now the government was a democracy, and lay people said that's the way it should be. In the church, everybody should have a say, but everybody didn't always see it that way. Then somebody else said the land of the free's got to do something about slavery. No sooner had they opened their mouth than the war broke out between the North and the South. There were Methodists on both sides. When it was all over, folks began to see all of God's children got to be free. That wasn't the end of it. Even today, the struggle goes on. Now the nation was growing by leaps and bounds, and everywhere Methodists could be found, they started missions and hospitals, colleges too. They went to India and China and Timbuktu. Now the age of the machine soon was here, and there were cities and factories far and near, and the Methodists saw there were workers in need, so they adopted themselves a social creed.
An end to child labor. The right of workers to organize. One day of
And the
rest
women kept on and made some more dents and finally got seated at General Conference. And they worked real hard to get the right to vote and put up the first sail on the temperance boat. Well, been through a lot in 200 years, been war and gore and lots of tears. Some of those folks who split back then decided to get together again. Now we have our fussing and fighting and fits, but we're still called United Methodist. Now ain't that something?
As you can see, the church struggled with the same issues that the nation and the world struggled with. The Trail of Tears, slavery, war, race relations, temperance, women's rights, education, and healthcare, just to name a few. And that's still true today. Because the church is in the world, and because the church serves the world, we have to apply our faith to the same issues that the world faces. Also, the video pointed out that the United Methodist Church is the result of many splits and mergers over the years. For example, at the time of the Civil War, the Methodist Episcopal Church split into the North and the South. Eventually, they came back together again. Other denominations besides the Methodist Episcopal Church, which came together to form the United Methodist Church, include the Evangelicals and the United Brethren. In 1968, which really was not that long ago, the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church came together to form the United Methodist Church. Maybe you've noticed that in some communities there are two United Methodist churches very close together. It's likely that one of those was formerly a United Brethren Church and the other formerly a Methodist Episcopal Church. Tomorrow we will consider the organization and structure of the denomination. I'll see you then. Have a great day.